Just 47 seconds, Jasmine Crockett opened a sealed file and Trump's face collapsed on live television. One line, one signature, and one flight to Epstein's island that had never been leaked until now. 278 names filled the folder, but only one was underlined in red. What exactly was in that file that made the most powerful man in America lose control? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The cameras turned on at exactly 9 o'clock m. Eastern. The red lights blinked across the ceiling of Oversight Chamber 7 as feeds from CNN, MSNBC, C-SPAN, and even Fox News flickered to life. No intro music, no commentator voiceover. Just the unfiltered hum of a room that felt too quiet for what was about to happen. Behind the dais, the seal of the United States House of Representatives loomed, bold, golden, and suddenly ominous. Jasmine Crockett walked in alone. She wasn't flanked by aides, wasn't scanning for cameras. She didn't need to. In her right hand, barely visible beneath the sleeve of her navy suit, was a small red USB drive, glinting like it carried something radioactive. A reporter in the front row leaned forward, squinting. Another whispered, "That's not on the docket." But Jasmine didn't stop. She moved to her seat, placed the USB gently beside her folder, and clasped her hands. At the far end of the long table sat President Donald J. Trump, not just a former leader now dragged back into hearings, but the current commander-in-chief, re-elected by razor-thin margins months earlier. He leaned back in his chair like a king returning to a conquered court, eyes narrowed at Jasmine. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he turned to whisper something inaudible to his lawyer. The lawyer chuckled and scribbled a note. AOC and Jamie Raskin exchanged a glance. Raskin's brow furrowed. OSC tapped her pen twice on the desk, an old habit when she was nervous. "He's too calm," she muttered under her breath. Raskin nodded but didn't look away from Jasmine. Chairman James Comer cleared his throat, pretending to read from his statement, though the pages in front of him hadn't turned in 2 minutes. This hearing has been called to address the pending subpoena for the unsealed Epstein-Maxwell files. We will maintain order, civility, and procedural accuracy. But no one was listening, not really, because every eye and every lens was now fixed on the red USB. Jasmine didn't speak right away. She inhaled once, eyes scanning the perimeter of the chamber, noting where every camera was. She could feel the heat of the moment pressing against her spine, but her expression stayed unreadable, steel wrapped in calm. Then, just loud enough for the mic to pick up, she leaned forward and murmured, "He thinks we're bluffing." She touched the USB. Her voice hardened. He's about to learn what truth sounds like. Math in his head. Jasmine didn't flinch. Behind the press line, a Capitol staffer received a ping on her phone. "Lav, red folder moment coming?" and immediately forwarded it to a DC Telegram group. Within 30 seconds, the phrase #RedUSB began trending on X. But still, no one knew what was inside that drive. Not yet. Not even the committee. All they knew was that Jasmine Crockett, former civil rights attorney, freshman congresswoman, and now the face of a movement no one could stop, had walked into this room with a secret. The only question was, who was it going to destroy first? Chairman James Comer struck the gavel once, more for symbolism than order. His voice was measured but tight, like a man trying to calm a fire he couldn't see but could definitely smell. The Oversight Committee convenes today to evaluate the motion regarding supplemental disclosure of federal evidence connected to the Epstein-Maxwell investigation. Behind him, the national seal gleamed. Around him, the weight of something about to go very, very wrong. From across the room, Trump chuckled. Not loudly, just enough for the mic to pick it up and send it humming into 42 million homes. He leaned toward his legal counsel, lips barely moving. "This is a circus." "She's the clown." His smile wasn't for Jasmine. It was for the cameras. "Mr. President," Comer continued, choosing the words carefully, "we ask that all comments be reserved until recognized." But Trump didn't care. He leaned toward the mic, slow and deliberate, and dropped it. "This is a witch hunt. A pathetic one." Cameras flashed. Reporters tensed. Jamie Raskin's pen stopped mid-sentence. A OC visibly swallowed. No one was surprised Trump said it, but everyone knew Jasmine was holding something that might make him wish he hadn't, and yet she didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She sat still, elbows on the table, eyes steady, face unreadable. That same red USB sat next to her untouched, like a grenade with no pin. Suddenly, Jim Jordan raised a yellow folder and waved it like a flare. "Mr. Chairman, before any material is introduced, we request an immediate procedural delay on the grounds of national security. Classified intel may be embedded in the files being referenced." He looked straight at Jasmine as he said it. "We don't need chaos today. We need restraint." Comer blinked. Garland, watching from the DOJ livestream room, leaned in. The chamber buzzed. Fox News cut away. MSNBC didn't. Then Jasmine moved. Just a tilt of the head. Just enough to meet Jordan's stare like it was a target. "National security," she said coldly. "Isn't your shield from guilt?" A pause. Then, "It's not a get-out-of-truth-free card. Not when victims have waited decades for names to be spoken out loud." The tension snapped. Reporters began furiously typing. A staffer in the back started crying quietly, but no one looked back. All eyes were forward now, locked on a woman who hadn't even opened her file, but had already cracked the ceiling of the chamber. Somewhere beneath the desk, Jasmine's thumb tapped the edge of the USB once, twice, like a countdown. But no one else knew the number. Trump's smile returned, but it was smaller this time, thinner. He leaned in again, whispering something to his attorney, who didn't answer. Outside, #WitchHunt or truth was already trending. Inside, every smile had hardened into something sharper. Because this wasn't diplomacy anymore. It was demolition. Jasmine Crockett didn't ask for permission. She didn't need it. The rules had already shattered, and now all that was left was truth. With one slow, deliberate movement, she reached for the red USB and inserted it into the secured committee port. The projector hummed to life. Every screen in the room lit up. Trump's legal team stood halfway, unsure whether to intervene or freeze. They chose poorly. They froze. Jasmine tapped the keyboard once. "Chairman Comer," she said without turning her head, "this is Exhibit 112. It is unredacted, verified, and protected under emergency evidentiary allowance." Comer opened his mouth to object, but he hesitated. The silence had a grip on the room now. Not even Jim Jordan spoke. The speakers clicked. A soft rustling sound. Then a voice. Jeffrey Epstein's voice. Measured, confident, slightly amused. Palm Beach was a different kind of meeting. That's when DT showed up. No staff, no wife, just him and two girls from Moldova. I told him no photos this time. It was followed by a laugh, not Epstein's. The audio ended. Time didn't. For 13 full seconds, no one in the chamber moved. Not one cough, not a shift of paper, not a breath loud enough to register. It was the kind of silence that doesn't exist in politics. The kind that only happens when something sacred has just been broken. On the main screen, a name appeared, slowly, letter by letter, like a sentence being carved into stone. Donald J. Trump. Palm Beach attendance, May 12, 2003. Confirmed by private jet manifest. Entry number 47 of 278. The silence ended when Trump shoved his chair back. The wheels screeched. His lawyer reached for his arm but missed. Trump leaned toward the mic, jaw tight, voice shaking, and snapped. This is manufactured. That audio is fake. This is political terrorism. His eyes darted to Comer. You let her play that? You let this lie go on air? Jasmine didn't react. She kept her eyes on the screen like it was still playing. The gallery murmured. Raskin muttered something to AOC. She whispered back, "They're not denying the meeting. They're only denying the tape." Outside the chamber, sirens could be heard faintly in the distance. Protesters had begun gathering en masse, their chants growing louder, bleeding through marble walls. Inside, Trump was still speaking, but no one was really listening. Because the question wasn't whether the audio was real, it was who else had been in that room. Jasmine finally turned back to the committee. Her voice was low, almost tired. If one name could shatter this much silence, how many others were buried to protect it? And in that moment, the room understood. This wasn't about one man's guilt. It was about the empire of silence built around it. And Jasmine had just detonated the foundation. 3 weeks before the hearing, a package arrived at Jasmine Crockett's Dallas home. No return address, no postage, no courier tracking. Just a small cardboard box taped once across the middle. The only thing written on it in thick black marker was a number. Number A. Jasmine didn't open it right away. She stared at it from across the kitchen counter, her coffee cooling beside it, her instincts screaming beneath the silence. That same morning, 2 other members of Congress had received suspicious envelopes. Both turned out to be false threats. But this didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a dare. She put on gloves, carefully unsealed the tape. Inside, a velvet pouch, the kind you'd expect to find in a jewelry store, not a political battlefield. And inside that pouch, a red USB, identical to the one now seared into the minds of millions across America. Tucked beneath it was a single slip of paper, torn from a yellow legal pad, written in sharp, blocky penmanship. They missed this one. Use it before they don't. She didn't know who M was. But she knew what she was holding wasn't just sensitive, it was dangerous. Within hours, Jasmine flew back to Washington and scheduled a private session with 2 trusted cybersecurity experts, both former federal contractors, both off the books. They quarantined the drive, ran it through every layer of decryption. It wasn't malware. It wasn't doctored. It was authentic, raw, and deeply embedded. Video logs, audio recordings, internal DOJ memos marked eyes only, and most chillingly, Epstein's voice, cataloging names, dates, places, and transactions, including one audio file she played alone in a dark room, headphones on. That was the file that would later become Exhibit 112. But here's what Jasmine didn't tell the public. Not even the press knew. Someone on the inside was still feeding her information. The name never appeared. The phone never rang. But encrypted messages began arriving through Signal every 72 hours, like clockwork. Short, surgical, just enough to confirm or steer. The source had access to sealed internal logs, DOJ deletion timestamps, and most damning, a burn protocol drafted in late 2020 outlining how to sanitize Epstein assets from executive proximity. The final signature on the memo? Approved by Interim Director Owal. Only Jasmine and a handful of legal staff knew what that meant. Office of Legal Counsel. A White House division, meaning this wasn't just obstruction. It was orchestration. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She stared at the USB, still glowing softly in her encrypted drive, and whispered to herself, "They buried this." But someone wanted it dug back up. And the question that haunted her more than anything else wasn't who sent it. It was this: why had they waited until now? The room Jasmine entered wasn't marked on any government blueprint. It sat in the basement of an independent legal review firm in D.C., shielded from surveillance, soundproofed and locked behind 4 levels of clearance. No phones, no electronics. Just one encrypted laptop bolted to the table and a dim overhead light that made every shadow feel intentional. At exactly 2 a.m., the screen flickered to life. A face emerged, pixelated, low resolution, but unmistakably human. Her name was Marla, once a top-tier digital archivist for the Department of Justice, now officially listed as retired for health reasons, off-grid, unreachable, until now. Her voice came through a scrambled audio relay, tinny and fractured like a wiretap from a Cold War thriller. I have 3 minutes. After that, this signal eats itself. Jasmine leaned forward, not blinking. We verified the contents of Exhibit 112. We're not just dealing with data. We're dealing with names, judges, CEOs, presidents. How did this survive? Marla didn't hesitate, because someone in the system wanted it to. That file was part of a group scheduled for deletion during what we called Operation Sweep. You won't find that name on any DOJ docket. It was internal only, digital purges, selective overwrites, quiet replacements. She paused. The video feed jittered. Behind her, the wall looked like cheap drywall, but Jasmine could see a metal bolt sticking out, the kind used in storm shelters. From 2019 to 2020, we erased over 800 federal records. Not just Epstein's logs, anything that connected him to sitting power. The instructions didn't come through official channels. They came on paper, handwritten, courier delivered. Legal said it was national security. But we all knew what it really was. Jasmine's voice dropped. Was Trump on that list? Marla went still. Then, without flinching, she said, "He didn't just approve it. He wrote part of it." Silence. A beat passed. 2. Then Jasmine. "Are you saying he physically instructed deletions?" Marla nodded once. There was a memo, internal only redacted since. The margin notes were his. We matched the handwriting. He circled one section in red ink. Next to it he wrote, "Remove everything after 2003, Palm Beach logs especially." Before Congress, May 12, 2003. Why that year? She asked, more to herself and to Marla. Marla replied, "I don't know what happened that day, but it's the only date that was underlined 3 times. The screen glitched again. Marla's voice started to distort. "They'll come after me for this. They already have." Her eyes glanced sideways, like she'd heard something off camera. "Be careful who you trust in that room, Congresswoman," she said. "They're not just protecting him. They're protecting what he knew." Then the screen went black, and the silence Jasmine sat in felt colder than anything she'd heard in that recording. Because for the first time, it wasn't about what they deleted, it was about what he chose to keep. The camera pans across a grainy aerial map of Texas, not in flames, but bleeding red lines. Districts carved like scars. Jasmine Crockett's voice emerges beneath it, calm but resolute. "They don't need fire to burn you down. They use boundaries, ballots, silence." Intercut footage shows school children being pulled out of now defunded public programs in South Dallas, a shuttered clinic in Jackson, Mississippi, and a mural in Atlanta half erased overnight after a city ordinance quietly rezoned the block. In each clip, someone is missing, a name not called, a voice not heard, a vote that disappeared without fanfare. Jasmine walks alone down a quiet corridor in the Rayburn building. It's after midnight. She stops at a wall-mounted district map. Her finger traces her own name, TX30, once a stronghold, now fragmented into thin lines spreading like veins across unfamiliar neighborhoods. They tried to delete you quietly, her voice says in narration. I'm here to make noise. The screen cuts to her district office 2 years ago, her first town hall. A young girl, no older than 11, asked her, "If they redraw your line, do you stop being our voice?" Jasmine's answer was simple then, "Only if I let them." Now, her reflection in the glass stares back older, sharper, more burdened. She turns away from the map and walks into her office, locking the door behind her. On her desk lies the red USB, still glowing faintly, still unexplained. The files inside aren't just logs and recordings. They include memos referencing district targeting strategy, terms used and classified, DOJ language not meant for public eyes. One PDF references high-risk representatives flagged during the Epstein investigation, those more likely to pursue exposure of suppressed materials. A list of names follows. There are 5. Her name is one of them. But only one file is labeled with a handwritten tag. Number Ike, Priority Monitor. Jasmine scrolls through the metadata. The last edit timestamp, March 3, 2021. One day after she gave a floor speech condemning voter suppression bills. The document wasn't supposed to survive. And yet, somehow, it found its way into her hands when others had been erased entirely. She steps outside her office onto the balcony, looking out at the Capitol dome lit against the night sky. Below, sirens echo, but the city doesn't sleep. Not tonight. The connection between the Epstein files and political erasure isn't just a conspiracy, it's a pattern. Erasure by proximity. Erasure by silence. Erasure by design. Jasmine grips the railing. Her voice returns, soft but surgical. They think deleting people is easier than defending them. She looks back at the USB. But someone made sure this didn't get deleted. She pauses. So the real question isn't what's in file number 112. It's why out of everyone they sent it to me. The gallery was already breathless before Jasmine spoke. But when she reached into the thick red folder on her desk and withdrew a sealed manila envelope, marked Exhibit 118, the silence began to collapse in slow motion. She didn't smile, didn't blink, just held the envelope in both hands like it was heavier than it looked. "Mr. Chairman," she said calmly, "under Rule 3.2 of the Evidence Disclosure Protocol, I am submitting a supplemental file that was sealed under protective order from the 2006 Palm Beach deposition." Trump shifted in his chair. A tremor ran through the chamber like a silent earthquake. Jasmine slid the photo from the envelope and placed it face up under the projection camera. A beat passed. Then the screens came alive. The image wasn't pixelated. It wasn't grainy. It was sharp, crystal clear. 3 people, poolside in Palm Beach. Epstein in a white polo. Trump in a navy blazer, laughing mid-sentence. And beside them, standing in a pink tank top and oversized sunglasses, was a girl. A child, unidentified, unnamed, but unmistakably underage. The timestamp in the bottom corner read May 12, 2003. Gasps. One reporter in the gallery dropped their phone. Another swore under their breath. Trump's jaw tensed visibly. He sat forward in his chair, one hand gripping the edge of the table like he was anchoring himself to reality. Then, a bark, explosive and unfiltered. "That's fake. It's fabricated. This is defamation." He stood, his voice rising, tone unraveling. You don't get to play games with old rumors and faked pictures just to score headlines. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She stood too, slowly, deliberately, and faced him across the room. "So sue me." Dead silence. He blinked. She didn't. "Take me to court," she continued, voice steady. "Put me on the stand. Make me swear under oath. because I'd love nothing more than to make that photo Exhibit A in a real trial with real discovery. Trump looked like he wanted to speak, but couldn't decide what to say. Jamie Raskin's eyes didn't leave the screen. AOC whispered something to her aide. Comer pretended to shuffle papers, but his hand was visibly trembling. And then Jasmine added, quieter now, but somehow even sharper. This photo isn't blurry. The memory of that girl shouldn't be either. The screen still showed the image. No one turned it off. Outside, protesters screamed. Inside, the ceiling felt lower than before. And for the first time since the hearing began, Trump looked small. Because when the truth becomes visible, the real question isn't whether it's admissible, it's whether you're brave enough to keep looking at it. The photo was still on the screen when Jasmine quietly reached for another folder, slimmer, darker, marked only with a red diagonal slash. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The chamber was already listening like its life depended on it. This, she said, holding up a DOJ internal log, was not supposed to exist. The screen blinked, then cut to a black and white visitor record, sealed, internal only, stamped with the initials of a Bureau of Prisons official. 2 dates were highlighted, both circled in red, March 19, 2025, April 3, 2025. Location, Metropolitan Detention Center, Brooklyn. Visitor DOJ Special Liaison classified. Jasmine looked up. Ghislaine Maxwell received 2 off-the-record meetings with Department of Justice representatives. Not by Zoom, not by lawyer proxy. In person, no transcripts. No legal counsel present. Gasps from the room. Jamie Raskin tilted his head, frowning deeply. Trump's lawyer leaned in to whisper, but Trump didn't move. His eyes were locked on the screen. Jasmine continued, sliding the next page into the projector, a Bureau of Prisons transport memo. Date stamped April 5th, it confirmed Maxwell's sudden transfer to FPC Bryan, a minimum security federal facility often used for white-collar offenders. Garden privileges, recreation access. Open-air movement. She circled one line in red. Transfer initiated at request of Executive Coordination Division. The phrase echoed. Then Jasmine turned and looked directly at the DOJ livestream screen. They moved a trafficker. To silence her? The question wasn't rhetorical. It landed like a gavel. A pause. Then, from 2 seats away, a OC leaned toward Raskin, voice barely audible beneath the chamber's tension. They're prepping a pardon. The sentence hung like a noose. No one repeated it, but no one denied it either. Trump scratched his jaw, not angry now, but calculating. That was the part that chilled Jasmine more than anything. He wasn't stunned. He was expecting it. She flipped to the final page. A handwritten log allegedly pulled from Maxwell's cell notes during routine inspection. Nearly every line redacted, except one. Promised name sealed. Meeting confirmed. He says he can make it disappear. Jasmine stepped back from the podium, eyes scanning the room. I want to know who he is, she said. Because if we are transferring sex traffickers to minimum security, gardens after backroom meetings, then the rot is not in the crime. It's in the clearance. The chamber didn't explode. It withered. The kind of quiet that feels like something enormous is being swallowed behind the scenes. Outside the chamber, phones buzzed with real-time leaks. Cable news anchors tripped over each other trying to break the story first. Hashtag Maxwell deal rocketed past 1 million mentions in under 6 minutes. And Jasmine? She just stood there, jaw clenched, eyes locked on that one black line in the memo that hadn't been unsealed. Because whatever deal was struck in that cell, it wasn't justice. It was leverage. The room darkened. Jasmine didn't speak as the screen flickered again, this time showing low-resolution black and white surveillance footage. Time stomp, October 8, 2020, 3:17 a.m. Location, Langley. But the file header read something else. Something colder. Burn room protocol, phase 3, level, non-retrievable. A staffer in the back gasped quietly. On screen, a man in a DOJ jacket wheeled in 3 large file crates. Another man followed, gloves on, ID badge turned backward. They said nothing. The camera had no audio, but their actions spoke in screams. Crates were opened. Stamped across each folder inside, Palm Beach guests, unredacted. One by one, they were fed into an industrial shredder bolted to the floor. A faint puff of particulate smoke curled toward a ceiling vent, disappearing like breath in cold air. The feed cut after 11 minutes. Jasmine faced the chamber. The glow from the screen behind her painted half her face in blue, the other in shadow. She didn't blink. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, "You didn't shred victims. You shredded evidence." The silence afterward was visceral. Not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something rotting beneath the floor. She held up the leaked DOJ internal memo next. Authorization, Executive Tier 2, Destruction Code, PB376B. Memo subject, Sensitive Log Sanitization, Epstein Registry. Raskin leaned in, squinting. A OC closed her eyes. Trump sat unnaturally still. Jasmine continued, flipping the page. Sign-off authority, Office of Legal Counsel, West Wing Liaison. Signed by Interim Deputy, initials KB. Whispers erupted in the gallery. One journalist mouthed the name. Another typed furiously, Kash Patel. Jasmine pointed at the screen again, her voice razor-thin. "We've seen the red folders, the names. The logs. We've heard the audio. Now we know what's missing." She clicked again. A secondary doc appeared, time-stamped 48 hours after the burn footage. It read, "Recommendation: expedite media containment. Downplay digital records. Prioritize optics over prosecution." Optics over prosecution, she repeated. They didn't plan to defend the guilty. They planned to erase the evidence until there was no guilt left to defend. Trump broke his silence. "You're reaching." Jasmine turned to face him, fire behind her words. "No, Mr. President. You already reached for the matches." He didn't reply. The projector shut off. For a long beat, no one said a word. The burn room didn't need commentary. It spoke in ash. Then Jasmine whispered, not to Trump, not to the press, not even to the committee, to the camera, to the people watching. If this is what they burned in one night, imagine what they buried over 20 years. The steps of the Capitol were no longer just marble. They were a pressure point, a fault line. And by morning, it cracked wide open. Dozens became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. Some carried signs that read, "Release the files," in black stenciled spray paint. Others had printed Jasmine Crockett's face on posters with the words, "Jasmine equals justice," scrawled in red permanent marker across the bottom. Chants pulsed like a heartbeat, raw, defiant, unified. No more secrets, no more silence. Camera crews jostled for space along barricades, MSNBC, CNN. Even Fox didn't dare cut away. One anchor whispered off mic, "We haven't seen this since the Kavanaugh protests. Maybe never like this." On the far side of the plaza, a makeshift survivor circle had formed, a small group of women and men sitting shoulder to shoulder, each holding candles even in broad daylight. Some wore black. Some wore shirts with Epstein's face and a red X drawn through it. But none were silent. One young woman, maybe 22, held a microphone in both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I was 16. They told me I was going to meet a modeling scout. I didn't know. I didn't know it was his house. The crowd fell quiet, listening. One camera zoomed in. Her voice trembled. Her fingers, too. The police never took a statement. They said he had friends in high places. I saw that same man on your screen yesterday. He was there. He saw me. She didn't need to say the name. Everyone already had. Suddenly, from the crowd, a tall man in a red Trump 2024 hoodie stepped forward and hurled a half-full drink toward her. It struck her leg, staining her jeans, splashing across her shoe. She gasped, then froze, then began to cry. Vun ben MCC Hunha, low ripple of outrage swept through the protest line, but before anyone could react, a small figure emerged from behind the security gate. Jasmine Crockett. No cameras. No press. Just her. She moved quickly through the crowd as Secret Service scrambled to catch up. Jasmine dropped to one knee beside the woman, wrapped a protective arm around her, and whispered something only they could hear. The girl nodded, wiping her eyes. Jasmine stood up and faced the crowd. You want to know why I won't stop? Why I plug in that USB? Why I read every file they tried to erase? Because she is not disposable. None of them are. The crowd roared, not loud, but deep, ground shaking. Survivors stood. Journalists stepped closer. Even security guards lowered their radios for a moment. Behind them, the Capitol doors loomed large and locked, but they didn't feel so impenetrable anymore. And somewhere, inside a safe, behind an office, behind a nameplate marked Executive Council, sat a folder labeled Pardons Draft. But whose name was written on page 1? Trump sat rigid, arms folded, lips twitching like he was chewing glass. His eyes didn't blink. His skin, once powdered for TV, now beaded with sweat. The latest document on screen, a confidential communication between Epstein's legal team and the Trump campaign in 2016, still flickered behind Jasmine like a lit fuse. She hadn't said a word in over 30 seconds. Then Trump exploded. You dumb bitch. You're gonna regret this. You think you're safe? You're not. I made this country, and I can break you. The room froze. It didn't gasp. It froze. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate before continuing to roll. Chair James Comer's mouth fell open but didn't speak. Jim Jordan adjusted his tie with trembling fingers. The Fox News feed blurred momentarily as if unsure whether to cut the feed or zoom in closer. Only one person moved. Jasmine. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. She simply inhaled once deep, deliberate, and turned slowly toward the camera lens aimed dead at her. Her voice, when it came, was low but blade-sharp. It didn't echo. It pierced. Let every girl who was told to shut up. Let every survivor called a liar. Let every voice buried under wealth and power and politics hear this right now. She glanced at Trump, then back to the lens. You were never the disgrace. They were. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear America breathe. In a side angle shot, AOC's eyes were glassy. Jamie Raskin mouthed something that looked like goddamn. Even Lauren Boebert sat paralyzed, unable to fake outrage for the cameras. CSPAN's live viewership surged by 2 million in under 3 minutes. Twitter flooded with hashtags. Hashtag never the disgrace and hashtag he snapped. In one cutaway, a 67-year-old woman in Michigan turned her TV volume up and whispered, "Finally." But Trump wasn't done. He lunged slightly forward in his seat, not physically at Jasmine, but as if trying to break through the screen between him and reality. His lawyer reached out to steady him, only to be shoved back. And Jasmine? She simply returned to her seat. She didn't need to raise her voice. He had already raised it for her. On her desk sat a paper, unopened, labeled FOIA suppressed. Victim number 7 testimony. She didn't open it. Not yet. Because first, she wanted America to ask itself something far deeper. If this is how the most powerful man in the country reacts under light, what do you think he did in the dark? The silence after Trump's breakdown didn't fade, it hung. A thick, electric hush laced with the gravity of something irreversible. Jasmine hadn't spoken again, nor did she need to. Her words had already burned through the marble and into the bones of everyone watching. But inside the chamber, something else was now moving, something slower, colder, more calculated. The law. Jamie Raskin cleared his throat, his voice steady but fierce. Madam Chair, I motion we issue a formal subpoena to unseal the complete Epstein archive names, communications, flight logs, surveillance metadata. All of it. Gasps echoed again, softer this time, not from shock, but from weight. Behind him, Robert Garcia rose without waiting. I second the motion. This is no longer a question of opinion. It's a question of justice. Transparency cannot be selective. The room rippled with the realization. The tide had turned. Chair James Comer adjusted his glasses with fingers that trembled ever so slightly. We will take the vote. This committee, this body, will decide whether we continue the excavation or if we choose to look away. Votes were cast one by one. Some were whispers. Others, declarations. When the final tally was read, it cracked through the air like thunder. 17 in favor, 14 against. The motion passed. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply closed her red leather folder and whispered something inaudible to a OC. The cameras didn't catch it. But a OC's eyes widened slightly before she gave the faintest of smirks. Then, slowly, she leaned back and looked across the aisle. Jim Jordan stood. His chair scraped across the polished floor, sharp and angry. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His face was already flushed, and his hands were clenched white. Without waiting for adjournment, he turned and walked out, jaw locked, eyes refusing to meet anyone else's. Fox News cut to commercial. MSNBC leaned in. Across America, living rooms buzzed. Did they just subpoena Trump? Is this real? What's in the archive? But Jasmine wasn't thinking about the cameras or the chatter or even the vote. Her hand, now resting flat on the USB, felt heavier than before. Not because of fear, but because she knew exactly what was coming next and how high the climb still was. She leaned slightly toward AOC again, this time allowing the mic to catch her voice. We're only halfway up the mountain. The chamber, though officially still in session, had turned funereal, solemn with purpose, hushed with awe. Outside, the crowds had grown. Signs now read, "Open every page, no more names buried, and subpoena all of it." The moment was choreographed. Jasmine Crockett rose with silent conviction, inserted the red USB into the Senate's projection interface, and pressed play on file number 112B. A second audio file, previously verified by forensic experts, was cued. This one wasn't just damning. It was devastating. It allegedly captured a phone call between Ghislaine Maxwell and a former White House chief of staff, time-stamped just days after Trump's private visit to Epstein's Palm Beach compound. The chamber dimmed as the monitors flickered to black for the file's preload, and then nothing. A static pop, a sudden blink, and every screen across the Senate chamber CNN's live feed, Fox's corner chyron, even the C-SPAN backup went black. Chairman James Comer nearly launched out of his seat, slamming the wooden desk with his palm. What the hell is going on? Who authorized this cut? A staffer scrambled toward the AV input panel, sweat already forming on his brow. Sir, there's no tech error on our end. This was remotely terminated. The room fell into a dangerous silence, not the respectful kind, but the kind that smells like sabotage. Jasmine didn't flinch. She kept her hand on the USB. Her eyes were locked on the blank monitor like it was still alive. They pulled the plug, she said softly, her voice as sharp as a scalpel. Which means, we're closer than they ever wanted us to be. Awok sat forward, whispering, "Who has override access?" The technician didn't answer. His hands were shaking. Across the aisle, Representative Lauren Boebert smirked, chewing the end of a pen. Maybe the deep state just needed a coffee break. Robert Garcia snapped back. Or maybe someone in this room made a phone call before the truth got too loud. Suddenly, a secondary projector, the independent live stream Jasmine had quietly set up with the help of a whistleblower tech, crackled to life in the back of the chamber. A ghostly image flickered. An email header. Subject line: Directive, Blackout Protocol. Target file 112B. Jasmine didn't look surprised. They didn't just fear the audio, they feared the ripple. Chaircomer turned red, flustered and cornered. This is out of order. This is not proper procedure. But the chamber had already shifted. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was suspicion. It was realization. A congressional hearing had just been interrupted, not by glitch, but by someone with the authority to kill the signal. The kind of authority that doesn't sit in Congress. The kind that wears a tie, signs things in back rooms, and buries files behind national security codes. Outside, the hashtag plug pulled was already trending. And on the sidewalk, survivors began to chant louder, "Play the file." But inside, Jasmine simply turned and looked into the camera with eyes that didn't blink. The question wasn't who pulled the plug, but how much more they were willing to destroy just to stop her from pressing play. The blackout hadn't silenced the hearing. It had detonated something far larger. While pundits on both CNN and Fox scrambled to fill dead airtime, Jasmine Crockett was already moving in shadows. 2 floors beneath the Capitol, in a private tech war room set up in anticipation of sabotage, a small team of trusted digital security experts was hunched over encrypted terminals. Coffee cups shook on desks. Fingers typed like lightning. Then came the message. It blinked in from an untraceable signal routed through 9 foreign servers. I was on the FBI cyber forensics team. I never signed up to bury victims. Check your USB's metadata log. Sector 13 was ghost injected remotely. You'll need hex reboot version 7.2, not 7.1. Good luck. Hashtag not all of us. No name, no IP, just a pulse in the dark and a lifeline. Jasmine didn't wait. She leaned over the keyboard herself, sleeves rolled up, sweat forming at her temple. "Run the rebuild," she whispered. Her voice didn't sound like a congresswoman's. It sounded like a field surgeon working without anesthesia. Montage. One aide reroutes power through a portable hardline. Another wipes magnetic interference from the USB using a method banned by Homeland Security. Someone else locks the chamber doors. No one enters. No one leaves. Every minute they work is another minute someone, somewhere, might try to stop them. Footage intercuts with silent camera shots of Washington's landmarks. The Lincoln Memorial at midnight. The Capitol glowing under floodlights. The Supreme Court building wrapped in silence. America is sleeping. But inside this room, democracy is sweating. Suddenly, the terminal screen pings green. Recovered segment. Audio file 112B. Voice recognized to 98% confidence match. A single waveform pulses across the screen like a flat line coming back to life. Jasmine's team leans in. They hit play. A man's voice fills the room. Familiar, charismatic, then heavy. "Look, I don't know what Epstein was into, but we all knew what the meetings were for. The girls, that was part of it. They wanted leverage. And yeah, I went. A few times. There's a pause on the tape. A cough. Then one more sentence that seems to drag every molecule of air from the room. Delete this after you hear it, because if this leaks, we all hang." The voice was unmistakable. It wasn't just a friend of Epstein's. It was a policymaker, a household name. And they weren't denying anything. They were outlining intent. Jasmine looked at her team, then down at the USB now resurrected from attempted digital execution. They tried to erase the truth, she said, eyes narrowed. Instead, they left us its confession. And outside, as Washington began to stir, a new storm gathered, not of denial, but of reckoning. The chamber had gone cold, as if the air itself braced for impact. Jasmine Crockett stood without a word, the red USB once sabotaged now reinserted. Her fingers hovered briefly over the laptop's touchpad, steady, like a conductor cueing the final, shattering note of a symphony no one wanted to hear. Then a single click. No warning, no context. Just 8 seconds of raw, unedited audio, crackling with the tinny sharpness of a hidden mic. "Get her off the guest list," the voice growled. "She's too young." The voice was unmistakable. Slurred slightly at the end, but the cadence, the arrogance, the command, it belonged to only one man. Donald J. Trump. The room didn't gasp. It halted. Cameras blinked. Reporters froze mid-sentence. One aide dropped her pen. You could hear someone inhale, then choke on it. It was only 8 seconds, but it felt like America aged 8 years in the span of that sentence. Within 4 minutes, every major cable network had looped it twice. Twitter, now X, exploded. YouTube's live feed crashed under an avalanche of 46 million viewers trying to replay the clip. Reddit threads titled #the 8 seconds spiraled into wildfire. Every pundit who had once smirked at Jasmine Crockett now fumbled for words. Conservative anchors sat stone-faced. Liberal ones blinked through disbelief. And in front of the world, a former president of the United States was caught describing a child like a VIP inconvenience. Across the room, Trump sat motionless. His tie looked too tight. His eyes scanned the crowd not for Jasmine but for exit signs. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply leaned toward her mic and said, almost like a prayer, "This isn't just political. This is rot in the bones of power. And if this country can't face it, it will never heal." A beat passed, then murmurs, then outrage. Then the rising sound of something bigger than applause, the tectonic rumble of accountability trying to stand upright. One by one, lawmakers who had stayed silent began texting aides, demanding clarity. Subpoenas were drafted mid-session. Senate offices received over 120,000 calls in under 40 minutes. Protesters outside grew louder. "Play it again," they shouted. "Play it again." And still, Jasmine stood still, her face calm, but her eyes burning. Inside the Justice Department building across town, Attorney General Merrick Garland was handed a transcript. He reread it twice. Then he whispered to his deputy, "How many of these tapes are still out there?" Back in the chamber, Jamie Raskin asked the question out loud. "Now that we've heard the voice, will DOJ finally find the spine?" But Jasmine didn't wait for an answer. She turned off the mic, locked eyes with the camera, and left the audience with one sentence, sharp enough to slice through history. If 8 seconds could crack the truth, what's still buried in the hours they erased? 8:03 a.m. Eastern. Every screen in the hearing chamber flickered, then turned jet black. For a breathless moment, everyone thought they were witnessing another blackout. But then, slowly, a new image emerged, not from C-SPAN, not from the Oversight Committee. It was coming directly from the Department of Justice. The seal of the DOJ glowed faintly on screen. Then a live feed snapped into focus. Attorney General Merrick Garland, face pale, voice composed but weathered, stared into the camera as if he were peering into the soul of a nation. "This is not a statement I ever imagined making outside of a courtroom," he began, pausing only to adjust his glasses. But in light of the newly released audio clip what the public calls the 8 seconds, I must confirm the following. He didn't look down. He didn't read from notes. Former President Donald J. Trump's name appears in no fewer than 5 sealed Epstein travel logs, 3 of which were filed under national security clearance in 2020. These documents were ordered withheld by executive directive, not from Congress, not from the courts, but from you, the people. The room inside Congress didn't explode, it imploded. The sound wasn't rage. It was disbelief gasping for breath. Chairman Comer leaned back, visibly rattled. Jim Jordan stared into his lap. Jamie Raskin closed his eyes. And Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Garland continued, "We attempted to pursue the documents, but we were blocked. I cannot elaborate further because the names tied to those logs extend into the national security apparatus, intelligence, corporate donors, sitting senators." He inhaled slowly. And yes, at the time, I chose not to defy that order. I believed protecting the structure was protecting the country. I now realize, he faltered, only for a second. You cannot protect a nation built on rot by reinforcing the mold. Gasps across the viewing platforms. MSNBC cut from commentary. Fox froze their panel in stunned silence. CNN's Chiron changed mid-sentence to one line. Garland, Trump on 5 Epstein logs sealed by executive privilege. Outside the Capitol, the crowd had doubled. Cries of "subpoena them all" erupted through the barricades. Back in the room, Jasmine finally spoke just 6 words, but they echoed louder than the Attorney General's entire broadcast. The cover-up wasn't silent, it was policy. The mic went dead again, but Garland wasn't finished. The live stream zoomed in closer, as if he wanted every American to see what guilt looked like in the daylight. "I am invoking emergency release authority," he said flatly, "and recommending unsealing all 5 logs for congressional review within 72 hours. Then came the words that brought Congress to its feet and the nation to the edge of its seat. What comes next may tear institutions apart, but if we don't let the truth in now, we may never find a door again." The room was already unsteady after Garland's broadcast, but Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. As the echo of Garland's final sentence dissolved into static, Jasmine Crockett stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The paper in her hand spoke louder than any mic ever could. It was thick, slightly yellowed, edges marked by red ink. 3 words printed bold at the top: Master Index, number 112. She turned slowly toward the camera bank. Then she walked deliberately toward the center podium and laid the document down like it was a sacred text. Not for show, not for drama. For evidence. "We have spoken of names," she said. "Here they are." She flipped the first page. Gasps spread like sparks across the chamber. Donald J. Trump, Senator Clark Lorman, Kentucky. Senator Helen Wyatt, Florida. Senator Randall Key, Missouri. She turned the page again. Bradley Quinn, CEO, Solon Aerospace. Naomi Vance, Coup, Pentabank. Reed Stanner, CEO, Voxel Pharmaceuticals. Carlos Menza, EnergyNet Holdings. Behind her, even C-SPAN cut to a full screen of the paper. The list of power, printed in ink that might as well have been blood. A list long buried. A list no one ever thought would see daylight. Jasmine didn't look at Trump. She didn't need to. "This is not a witch hunt," she said, her voice unwavering, even as half the room leaned forward in disbelief. "This is a graveyard of truth, and every name here walked over someone else's silence to stay in the dark." Trump lurched up from his chair. "You don't have the right?" Jasmine raised her hand, not to silence him, but to silence the noise around him. Her expression was calm, focused, unshaken. "This list wasn't leaked by a partisan. It wasn't made by Democrats or Republicans. It was constructed by survivors, by analysts, by people who were told to delete it and chose instead to hide it for this moment, for today. Jim Jordan tried to speak, but Chaircomer waved him off. No one moved. The room had gone beyond politics. This wasn't oversight. It was exhumation. Outside, the crowds roared louder than ever. Helicopters circled. Police formed lines. But inside, Jasmine's words drowned them all out. She placed her hand on the document as if she were swearing an oath. History doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the ones who were never supposed to survive it. And then came the final blow, quiet but piercing. If this list made it to my hands, the question isn't how. The question is, who's next? It happened slowly at first, like the air had been vacuumed out of the chamber. Then chaos erupted. Phones buzzed on every desk. Aides darted in and out like ants from a burning hill. Across the hall, Senate subcommittees were convened in emergency sessions. No one wanted to be caught off guard. Not now. Not after Jasmine Crockett had detonated a truth bomb that scorched the marble walls of Congress itself. Inside the hearing room, Jasmine stepped back from the podium, her breath shallow, shoulders tight. She wasn't smiling. This wasn't victory. This was aftermath. Across the aisle, several Republican senators whispered in urgent clusters. One turned white as chalk and whispered into a burner phone. Jim Jordan was nowhere to be seen. He had walked out 20 minutes ago, no press, no statement. Just vanished like a man with too much to hide and nowhere to run. Then came the outburst. Donald Trump slammed his palms on the long mahogany desk, rattling the microphone. She forged it. "This whole thing is a smear," he shouted, voice cracking. But the room was no longer his. He wasn't a president here. He was a name on a list, a shadow people had feared too long. And for the first time in years, no one moved to defend him. He stormed out in silence, his legal team scrambling after him. Cameras caught every step, and the nation watched a man who once commanded nuclear codes now unable to control the shaking in his fists. And then, quietly, the gallery stood. One by one, row by row, survivors. Some had testified behind closed doors. Others had never spoken their truth aloud. But now, in the open air of Congress, they rose, many with tears in their eyes, some holding photographs, others simply standing in quiet solidarity. No one clapped. It was too sacred for applause. Until one girl, maybe 17, maybe younger, raised a fist. Then came the ovation, not from politicians, not from staffers, but from the people who had lived in the shadows of those names for decades. Jasmine didn't cry, but her hand shook as she gathered her folder and looked toward the gallery. Her voice didn't rise, but her soul did. Across the Capitol, Senate leadership announced the formation of 2 emergency investigative panels. Grand juries were whispered. Subpoenas were drafted before the ink on Garland's statement had dried. But no arrests. Not yet. Because power doesn't fall all at once. It fractures slowly, violently, publicly. Jasmine walked out with the folder hugged to her chest. Outside, flashbulbs exploded like gunfire. Protesters chanted her name. The wind picked up. But deep down, even in that moment of thunderous reckoning, one question crackled beneath it all. Would any of the monsters whose names filled that folder ever actually see the inside of a prison cell? The house was quiet, too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that hangs in the air after a storm has passed, but before the damage has been fully seen. Jasmine Crockett set her keys down on the kitchen counter like they were heavier than steel. Her blazer still smelled faintly of sweat and marble, dust, the residue of a chamber that had nearly exploded under the weight of buried truth. The red folder was clutched in her arms, dog-eared, bent, frayed at the corners. She didn't dare throw it away. Not yet. She turned the corner into the living room and froze. Her entire coffee table was covered. Letters, dozens of them. Some typed, others scrawled in careful cursive, some on torn notebook paper, one written in purple crayon. Each envelope bore no return address. Just a single word on the front, Survivor. Her hands trembled as she reached for the top one. It was sealed with red wax, cheap, melted lipstick maybe, but still deliberate. A heartbeat later, she unfolded it. Dear Congresswoman Crockett, when I was 13, they told me no one would believe me, that if I ever said his name, I'd disappear. But I saw your face on TV today. You didn't shake. You didn't flinch. You said the names they said were unspeakable. So I'm writing mine now. I'm still afraid, but I'm also still here. And when I grow up, I want to be like you, the one who made them listen. Jasmine sat down slowly, the paper resting against her chest like a second heartbeat. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't cry. She couldn't. There were too many names still in that folder. Too many girls and boys who hadn't yet found their voice. She picked up another envelope, then another. Stories poured out like hidden rivers. Teachers, drivers, pastors, neighbors. Each line a scar. Each sentence a scream that had waited years to be heard. The doorbell rang. She stood, still gripping the letters, heart pounding like it did on the hill. Through the peephole, she saw no one. Just a package on the porch flat, wrapped in brown paper. No sender, no markings. Inside, a USB drive. And one note. Buried. She stared down at the device in her palm, the weight of it anchoring her to something deeper than fear, something ancient. Because maybe this wasn't over. Maybe this was only the opening chapter of a truth too dangerous to stay hidden. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Jasmine Crockett stood barefoot in her bathroom, staring at the mirror. The lights above flickered slightly, humming the way old bulbs do when a storm has just passed but might still return. Her eyes were swollen, not from tears, but from time, from weeks of fire, of fury, of fighting a machine that never sleeps. Her reflection didn't look like a hero. Just a woman with shadows under her eyes and scars no camera could see. She whispered to no one. Was it enough? The silence answered back. Suddenly, memory intruded like lightning across her mind, sharp, quick and cold. The night her office was evacuated after a bomb threat. The envelope of white powder labeled traitor. The voicemail that just repeated her home address over and over and over. The mirror flickered again. And then, softer memories. A little girl in Detroit holding up a hand-painted sign, Jasmine equals justice. The South Dallas mural, 10 feet tall, with her face painted beside the words, she didn't flinch. The candlelight vigil outside Congress, where hundreds held up flashlights and chanted, say their names. She turned the faucet on. Let the cold water run until her fingertips numbed. She looked at herself again, not the bags under her eyes or the ache in her shoulders. She looked deeper, into the quiet part that hadn't yet broken, the part that had held steady while the world screamed. And in that silence, she saw what mattered. Not if it was enough, but that it had begun. The letters were real. The files were real. The survivors were real. And every time she'd stood up, she hadn't been standing alone. She leaned in, wiped the fog from the glass, and whispered once more, we're not done. Not by a mile. Because somewhere out there, another envelope was being sealed. Another voice was preparing to speak. And Jasmine Crockett, bruised, tired, but unshaken, had just become the mirror that made silence unbearable. The screen cuts to black for half a second. Then it fades into a tight-shot Jasmine Crockett, alone under a single studio light, seated behind a desk stripped of symbols. No flags, no filters, just truth. Raw, unscripted, and loaded with gravity. There's no makeup, no teleprompter. Her eyes are red, her voice hoarse not from weakness, but from the weight of what she's carried across the last 72 hours. She doesn't blink when she begins. This fight was never about proving a point. It was about restoring a pulse. A pulse to a democracy that flatlined every time a child's name was sealed in silence. Every time a file was buried. Every time a woman was told her story was too inconvenient for justice. She breathes in. The camera doesn't cut. Her eyes stay locked on the lens like she's looking straight into every living room in America. They told me to sit down. I stood up. They told me to shut up. I brought a microphone. They told me this would end my career. I said, if exposing the truth ends my job, maybe the job was broken to begin with. Behind her, the faintest flicker of headlines project across the dark wall. USB bombshell. Congress erupts. Survivors applaud. But Jasmine never turns to see them. Her focus is the people watching, especially the ones who've been too afraid to speak. So if you're out there, and you're still carrying what they told you to hide, I'm telling you now, this chamber is open. And so is the record. Her final words aren't yelled. They're whispered, razor sharp, delivered like a verdict. Comment below. What truth still needs to be unsealed? She leans forward, still holding eye contact. 1 beat. 2. We unseal the silence or we become it. The screen fades to black. And across the dark, one sentence slowly burns into view. The map tried to erase her. Instead, it redrew a country one voice at a time. When systems fail, voices must rise. Jasmine Crockett's stand reminds us that silence is not neutral, it's complicity. In a world where truth is buried under power, the bravest act is to speak, especially when you're told not to. You don't need a USB or a microphone to make noise. You need courage and conviction. What truth in your life still waits to be unsealed? Drop it in the comments. Your voice could be the match that lights someone else's courage. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.